In the 1760s, a Frenchman visiting New York approached a trading post when he saw something unusual. A group of Iroquois Indians were bringing animal skins and fur to trade for things like tools and guns. Now, that part was perfectly normal. The strange part was when the Indians sat down to wait. They brewed themselves some tea, sweetened it with sugar, and drank it from porcelain cups. The tea had come from Asia, the sugar was from the West Indies, and the cups were made in England. All of them had come to America through Britain's extensive trade networks. In the 17th and 18th centuries, England's economy, like that of most European powers, depended on trade. This was the result of an economic system called mercantilism. Believing that there was a limited source of wealth in the world, the goal of a mercantilist economy was to amass the most silver and gold at the expense of all the other nations. And this was done through a favorable balance of trade. So by exporting manufactured goods and limiting the number of imports, nations brought in hard currency. This could help them fight wars against the other nations. The colonies became an important part of mercantilism, even though they didn't have vast supplies of gold and silver, as had been hoped. England's raw materials were limited, but the colonies were full of all kinds of resources that England needed. New England provided timber and ships. Grain from the middle colonies fed England's booming population, and the South provided tobacco, indigo, and other cash crops. Best of all, England could get all of these things without having to pay for them in hard currency. They could simply get them all through triangular trade. British goods were traded for slaves on the African coast, who were shipped to America and traded for the raw materials. So even though the colonies were established to enrich the mother country, they each had an internal economy as well. And this, too, revolved around trade. In the earliest days, people literally had to make or trade for everything they needed. The northern colonies especially developed cottage industries that traded on a simple barter system. For example, one household might mill grain while his neighbor spun wool. Even as the colonies were growing, their overseas trade remained based in agricultural products. The earliest towns and cities were places just to collect crops for shipment to England and then to offer the colonists imported goods they needed to build a home or run a farm and provide for their family. The first tradesmen who appeared in towns were the people who could create these implements instead of importing them, people like blacksmiths, brickmakers, gunsmiths, and saddlers. And then as the colonies grew and these basic necessities of life were easier to get, more genteel trades like printers, attorneys, silversmiths, or physicians increased. Children frequently learned their father's trade, but it was also common for them to be apprenticed to another tradesman elsewhere in the colony. With the growth of towns and cities, merchants opened for business. General stores stocked their shelves with merchandise from England. Dressmakers used textiles imported from England. Cobblers made shoes with leather from, you guessed it, England. Few cities developed in the South, since the population was spread far apart and plantations became self-sufficient. But even they traded with England, they just didn't do it through a merchant in town. This exclusive trade with England had both positive and negative side effects. American ships were protected from pirates by the English Navy, and colonists could get credit from English banks. The importation of English goods made many New England merchants rich. It kept ports in the middle colonies busy, and it helped to anglicize the diverse population. And Southerners had a guaranteed market for their tobacco, rice, and indigo. Of course, Great Britain liked this exclusive trade too. They had a growing new market for their manufactured goods and cheap new resources from which to make even more stuff. But as the colonies matured, they began seeking trading partners other than England. So the British authorities passed a series of laws called the Navigation Acts to restrict colonial trade in favor of English mercantilist policies. Beginning in 1651, these acts restricted colonial trade to ships made in England or America. Anything imported into America had to go through England first. The colonies were restricted from manufacturing certain types and quantities of goods, and most importantly, there were lists of so-called enumerated items that couldn't be sold anywhere except England or another American colony. Now, the goal of the Navigation Acts was to force Americans to buy English goods. This drove prices up, because the colonists had to pay whatever England decided to charge. They